WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. We come to you each and every Tuesday at 2:30 with replays at 7 p.m. on Star Communications TV and WCLN Radio simulcast. We're talking today with Ed Causey, the County Manager for Sampson County. Ed, thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We've heard a lot, and counties as a whole, particularly rural counties, is going through a lot of challenges budget-wise. One of the things that interested me as I looked at this 890-page document for 22-23 was that your introduction context itself around a 2012 budget. And that commentary struck me as being very interesting. And I want to just touch on a couple of things or kind of put this out for you to maybe expand on. There was two particular options in your 2012 commentary about that budget that reflects today. And the first option you said is to continue making decisions based on solely our current needs with the assumption that economic conditions will improve on their own. The second option that you pointed out in 2012 and regards to this 2022 budget and 23 budget is our second option is to consider a budget which not only addresses our current needs, but also produces a physical framework within which we can consider and tackle the long-term needs of the county. Help us understand, first of all, looking back at 10 years, and now looking at where we are now, does both of those options still fit where we are now? Are we able to consider option two and look at what our future needs is going to be in the current economic situation?
Yes. I would tell you, I would tell you, JW, that in 2012, well, first of all, back up again. The first thing I do when I'm doing budgets is I basically go back and read all of the budget messages that have been done since I have been here. The reason I do that is I try to encapsulate all of the significant things that have occurred during the year in order to remember those and put them in perspective. You can remember a lot of things that have been done, but sometimes it becomes a little bit confusing to remember the exact time. In looking at the 2012 budget, I thought it was extremely interesting that the view that we had was we were more concerned about the budgets 10 years from then than we are with that one, and that's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Again, I would tell you that we have been or are on a positive track. It just depends on how we choose to move forward. And of course, the pandemic and inflation and things like that have certainly factored in with a lot of the decisions that everybody has made.
Well, I think one of the things also that I look at now, and again, as we're going to do some reflecting back as we're talking today, so I want to kind of keep people focused on this idea that some of the things that was done 10 years ago now have been positively impacting what we're able to do today. And that current situation that we're in now is and possibly will be pretty much unpredictable going forward. So how do we sustain that idea that we also need to make sure that we have a little, how should I put it, cash asset capability, at the same time give people what they either feel like they deserve or maybe legally they do deserve?
That's a difficult question. I would tell you what my mother always taught me. She said you always need to think about what's on the other side and what is likely to occur as you get there. So going into this budget, certainly there are challenges out there. We have just been through the pandemic. We've got inflation that at various times one can say has raged out of control, and one can then argue as to when it's going to come back in control or not. So those things impact both how the commissioners viewed the budget and how we as administrators viewed what we were going to propose them. We felt like the immediate concerns of what was going on were so uncertain that we needed to be very vigilant with the budget and deal with it and try to be as realistic as possible. Thus, we had prepared a budget that necessitated that we felt like we proposed a tax increase. The commissioners, as they viewed the budget, felt like in this particular circumstance, the current conditions of the economy were so stringent that we did not need to impact the taxpayers any more than possible. So they chose to let's take a pause and try to develop a budget that just gets us by for the year. Hopefully things will improve, and then we can get a more conscientious view of how we want things to proceed in the future.
One of the things also I want to kind of touch on, and this I think is a perfect segue into that, is the budget that is prepared. And again, as I believe I've stated, this is an 890-page budget. This is not something that is baked or cooked overnight. This is something that is a somewhat of an arduous process that starts with the department heads in the county preparing a document that is sent to you. And if you go online, folks, you can go online and pull this budget up and look at it. I encourage people to do it. Granted, they're not going to sit there and look at it all, but they prepare that, submit that to you, and then there's another process that it goes through to review each one of those items before it goes into it does not just automatically go into the budget and go to the Board of Commissioners. Tell us how that works.
Basically, what we do is we start talking about the budget, what we're going to do for a given year in January. The first thing in a typical year, and we did it this year, is we have a planning session with the commissioners to give them an opportunity to visit the highlights of what is encountered during this 2 or 3 day process as the year may present. We invite the school systems in, the community college, and the other partners, as well as some key things going on in the county to give them some insight on what we are facing. The next step is we then turn around and we invite our department heads to submit their budget request, and we try to get those in by the middle of March. And then the finance officer, who is David Clack, and I, we begin the process of evaluating all of that information and trying to make our initial recommendations. Some of that creates additional dialogue with department heads, depending on circumstances. Sometimes it doesn't, or we're getting all kinds of clarification. And once we put that preliminary information together, we begin to have individual conversations with the commissioners to give them some general sense of what is coming and to take advantage of as much input as possible.
In that process, is there a time, and you alluded, I think, to this, but is there a time that you look at that and from a big picture reality check, maybe that department head is communicated with and you say to them, this is just not something that's going to work. I mean, it's like, I want a jet to fly to Miami to do whatever. I mean, that's absurd, but I'm just saying, is there something that sometimes your folks look at it and say, we need to reach out to so-and-so and just say, this year, this is not going to work. And if that is true, did you have to do that this year?
There's a number of those conversations that occur every year. Generally, what we do is when we get the initial budgets in, we look at them and make our comments and have conversations and receive clarifications. We then have general conversations with the commissioners, telling them what we're working on and trying to get some feedback and get some insight. It's not where anybody's approved anything. You're trying to get insight on the conditions. Once we get in the final stages, JW, I will tell you, we do not always have time to come back and talk with departments about specifically what we may not be recommended. Keep in mind, even though we did a tax increase, we basically reduced the initial requests that were submitted to us by nearly $7 million. So there are some things. At the same time, I tell you that one of the things that I saw when I came here is sometimes department heads seem to be reluctant, for whatever reason, to present their request as what they needed to be. And one of the things I have gone on, so I don't fault anybody for sending me a request that has more than what we can fund, because it is that department head's job to convey what he thinks he or she is the needs of that department. Then it is our job to evaluate those. And as I tell them, if you need something and don't request it, then that's on you. Once you've made a request, it does not get funded. That's sort of the responsibility of administration as to what gets funded and does not.
So again, what I'm hearing you saying is oftentimes these things come in and the budgetary analysis starts early, as you indicated, but then when it comes in and you go over these line items, there's things there that may or may not be negotiated, should I say, with that department head. Is that kind of an easy process, or do you get into a push and shove kind of thing when the department head says, look, if I don't get this, I'm either going to violate the law or I'm going to, somebody's going to get injured. All of those things. How does that work?
There's a lot of dialogue that can go on. Sometimes we do get budgets where there are very few questions on, or they've explained it and we adjust it and do what we need to do and then go on. But if we try to maintain the spirit of people advocating for what they legitimately think that they need, and then it's our job to look at the total county perspective. You can't expect any department head to get the big picture of what is going on specifically with the budget with the county. That rests on just a few of us to sort of make those adjustments and try to make it fit in as best we can.
When you first stepped up, Ed, and said that we're looking at 5%, or you made a recommendation for that 5-cent tax increase, did you really think that was going to go through?
I understood that there would be some concerns, but I also felt like because of the nature of what we were dealing with from a budgetary standpoint, I felt that it was in my conscience sort of told me I had to do that. Plus, I wanted to share with everyone the perspective. Now, bear in mind, I have complete appreciation for the autonomy of the commissioners and their decision making, because they do consider some legitimate concerns that may not be at the forefront of what I'm looking at when I am doing the budget. And so to sit here and argue that our tax rate is high is already too high is kind of the way you have to just understand.
We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be back. We're talking with Ed Causey, the county manager for Sampson County, about the budget and other issues facing the county.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for being with us today. The name of the show is We Should Know. My name is J.W. Simmons, your host, and I'm talking with Ed Causey, the county manager for Sampson County. Mr. Causey, thank you for being with us today. Look forward always to your commentary. In this second segment, first segment, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about the introduction of the budget for 22, 23. I want to kind of get into some of the departments within the county because we're not going to have time to go through all of them. I don't know whether folks know or not, but they can look at this budget online. I encourage people to do that and just look at the number of departments that submitted budgets to you to be able to be processed to get to the commissioners. When I look at that, also when I look at that 890-page budget, I could see some numbers that were considerably higher, and there seemed to be 3 or 4 departments that consumed that piece of pie that we call a budget. Tell us what those departments are and how you look at those, and of course all of these departments are critical functions.
First of all, if you looked at the budget just strategically and trying to get the top side picture, you would find that public education receives probably up there about 30% of the total budget. If you look at look at the operating expenses that the schools get as well as the capital improvement money and the debt payments and whatever that is significant. The next area I think you probably alluded to, which is right under the schools, would be public safety, which includes the sheriff's office, detention, emergency management services. Those services total probably close to 30, but I think it's a little bit less, like in the 29% range. And then as you come down, you have the social services, which is basically the Department of Social Services and the Health Department. I forget what their percentage is, but it is kind of significant. If you look at any of that, one of the challenges we had, particularly with public safety, is geographically we're either the largest county in the state or the second largest. Well, when all of a sudden you begin to apply your services and try to cover that much area, there is some expenses that are incurred, which is what we end up sharing in the budget, and that does create a challenge for us. The history of what we have done over the last year is with salaries. You've got two types of structure that you got to consider. You've got to consider your physical infrastructure. You've got to consider your human infrastructure. And we have been challenged on having salaries that are comparable for our human infrastructure. And keep in mind, we're dealing with lots of people who have a special skill set, whether it be law enforcement, nurses, nurse practitioners, inspectors, health department people that work across the board. Well, those are competitive, and there's adjoining counties that also employ those same types of positions. So if you don't have a competitive wage for all of your employees, at some point in time, your customer service is going to suffer just merely because you don't have the pay scale to entice those people that you would love to also keep from moving, and that's sort of the essence of where we are.
And I think the other piece of this, as we look at it in the sustainability of it, the pay grades and pay scales. You did some years ago a pay study that actually looked at the analytics of what we were paying people, and through your efforts and your staff to bring people to a standard that had some equality and equity to it. Is that pay study still sustainable in the society we're in now, the economic society we're in now?
The pay study that you're referring to was enacted in 2015. It necessitated a $3.7 million salary increase. The commissioners were committed to it, but did not want to raise taxes, so we actually came up with a 4-year implementation period in order to do that. Unfortunately, by the time you get your pay study implemented in 2019, you're already behind the 8 ball, and we were beginning to see challenges with employees across on the salaries of maintaining ourselves competitive. Over the last year, the commissioners elected to increase all salaries by a combination of 10%, and the 10% is actually a little bit more. There was 5% that was done last July. There was 5% done this past January, and then there was a 2% bonus that came out of the ARP money that was done in December. So all employees had at least a 12% increase, and there were some additional monies that were allocated for step increases to help people get to the midpoint of what their salary range was supposed to be. Well, we are kind of behind on that. I would tell you, at the time we did the pay raise in January, according to the way we were looking at it, that would have had us even with the board, except for the inflation or consumer price index for 2021. Well, that was above 7%. So even with what we have done now, if you're looking at from a standpoint of cost of living increases, we're probably 4.5% behind. At the same time, we need to also recognize that when we did a salary increase that was that significant, that creates a little bit of a burden to make sure that you've got the resources to pay that. And when the commissioners did the 5% increase in January, they said we will not do any other cost of living increases or salary increases until we have an updated market study done. And in fact, we were supposed to do that. However, when we did the budget, one of the things, because of the challenges we've had, that proposed market study to be updated was deferred until a later date. Because quite frankly, you really want to be careful about doing a market study unless you feel like you have got the resources to implement it once you get the data back.
And that's important, I think, for folks to understand, because everybody's being hit with this kind of double whammy, if you will, in the sense that they're not maybe getting that increase that they maybe were anticipating, obviously because of the economic situation globally and the United States and statewide, but they're not getting that. At the same time, they look at it and go, well, will I get it in the future? Is that going to still be sustainable? Will that study still be applicable a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road when hopefully things level out?
Well, I think in Sampson County, I think I can cut to the chase very quickly. I think if our employees in the county look at what has been done over the last 6 or 7 years, they will see that there is a commitment to not only provide good facilities for us in the school system, but they will also see there's been a genuine effort to make our salaries competitive. And at the end of the day, bear in mind, the reason we want to pay people well is because we want to provide good services and have top-level customer service. And certainly up until now, that effort has been made. And I think what we're going through now is the period of time where the commissioners are going to have to evaluate where we are and determine the direction and how we want to approach the future and things that we may need to do.
When we look at financial resources and we think about education, a lot of folks out there understand, I think, this, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, the county supports 2 public schools, one City of Clinton and one in Sampson County. People oftentimes may look and say, well, why is the county using their funds to support the Clinton City schools? And maybe you want to elaborate a bit on that, because of the tax structure. Folks in the city literally pay county and city tax.
That is correct. Public education is a function of county governments, and not necessarily something that cities are necessarily required to do. In our case in Sampson County, we got two different school systems. We got the Sampson County school system and we got the Clinton City school system, and both of them are funded by the county. By law, we are required on operational monies to pay each school system the same amount of money on an equivalent per student basis.
So if you look at this budget, you see those numbers per pupil that is allocated to city and county. So do those numbers have to be equal or equitable?
They have to be equitable. The money received is the same dollars per student times the number of students that each school system has.
And I think that's critical for folks to understand. And oftentimes people say, well, I want to move my child to go to this school or that school or those kinds of things. And there's where it kind of gets a little bit fuzzy to understand that there's more logistics than just one number to say, well, that number means I'm going to get better here or better there.
Yes.
So the big question, I think, for folks is to kind of grasp something that was, I believe, one of the statements, and we might need to go into the next segment with this because we're coming up on kind of a 2-minute break here. But this idea of population, and I think you mentioned it in one of your commentaries, is the population hasn't increased. In fact, it may have declined a bit in Sampson County. When we look at that and we say, okay, services seems to be increasing. The cost of everything's increasing, but yet we've got less people to serve. What's happening in that equation that's not just empirical, that maybe is things that we don't see happening?
That is an extremely good question. I think according to the census, I think the county lost population in the range of 4,000 to 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. I think as far as the school system, I'm reluctant to give an answer, but there was some reduction in the number of students that each school system had. I want to say it was about 100, but I want to maintain that is what I think I'm remembering as opposed to what I know to be a fact.
And that within itself, and when we look at other services, whether it's the number of EMTs we have or the number of response calls, do we look at the numbers in equating the need, the actual numbers of citizens, or do we look at the number of calls or services that is requested, or do we look at the demand factor as it relates to the comparative demand of other populations that have these? These are the kinds of things I want to kind of, when we come back from this break, kind of get into a little bit, not too much deep that I get lost somewhere in the fog, but kind of address how do we make those judgment decisions about what our needs are and how many. I'll give you an example. How many eggs do we have in the refrigerator? Is it too many or do we have enough? Just think about that, folks, as we're coming back from the break. We're talking with Ed Causey. Call a friend, stay tuned. We're talking about your money, your dollars. We'll be back in a moment.
At home or away, knowing who is at your door is priceless. Star Communications is here to help with its doorbell security camera by Skybell. Live viewing and two-way audio equips you with the ability to always see and greet anyone that shows up at your door. If this is the kind of confidence you are looking for, call Star Communications today at 1-800-706-6538 to learn more about this intelligent security that you can always depend on.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for being with us. We Should Know is on there. We're talking with Ed Causey, the county manager for Sampson County. Ed, thank you for being with us. We talked about a lot of stuff in the first couple of segments today. We're on our third segment now. I want to try to get into a little bit of this whole budgetary, not only analysis, but looking at it in application sense and how this is applied. As you went through the process, we know that the commissioners, the BOC, the Board of Commissioners, decided not to go with a tax increase. And there were things that were eliminated, and they've been listed. I'd like to kind of touch a bit on those, but even more so, look at some of the things that you see down the road that we need to look at based on what history has taught you, based on things that you know we need to be prepared for. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that with emergency response, we've got people that need things that are there. We've talked about hurricanes here and preparing for those, and heaven knows you've been through a lot of those in this county. But kind of give us some perspective on those issues. And I don't want to contain you. I don't want to give you a specific question. I want to give you as much latitude in that particular discussion as possible.
Just to give you a bird's eye view of the budget and where we were coming from. Basically, one of the things that we do is I try to make budgeting for me as simple as possible. So when we start out with the budget, one of the things I like to do is I like to look at plus and minuses versus last year's budget. Mm-hmm. For example, the first thing I want to do is how much additional revenue am I going to have, whether it be from property tax, sales tax, whatever. And we work very hard to come up with reasonable projections. This year we projected increased revenues of about $2,400,000 and some change. Mm-hmm. However, expenditures that had already been committed to before we got into the budget were only $30,000 less than what we had projected income. Some of the salary increases, bear in mind that we did in January, required funding from the General Reserve. We did an additional 6 paramedics back in the fall. We did some raises for the detention center and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. All total, those expenditures basically zeroed out all of the increases that we had. So we were having a budgetary challenge to start with. In working with the commissioners and understanding, one of the things that they eliminated, which was a little better than $1 million, were basically the deposits that we had been making into the various reserve accounts, whether it be for the county's capital improvements, whether it be for the community college, whether it be for the school systems, as well as economic development. Those expenditures that we decided not to fund this year totaled a little bit more than $1 million. And then I think there were some expenditures out of the various budgets that we decided to maintain, all of which I don't have right before me, but can gather very quickly if we want to get into specifics. I think of the additional positions that we had recommended. I think we had recommended it was a total of probably 6 or 7 positions. And the only real positions that were funded were the 4 additional telecommunicators that were needed. But we have budgeted for those to begin in January, and then there was one part-time position at the Department of Social Services that was pushed forward to a full-time position.
One of the things in those that was kind of excluded too was economic reserve account. And I want to just not dismiss that, because one of the things you and I have talked about before is this growth aspect. When we start looking at the budget, if we have the industry, if we have the businesses, if we have that movement of cash, that's also a critical asset to our budget. So how would that impact economic development in the county, in not only attracting business, but ensuring that we're building the infrastructure physically to bring that prospective industry here? I think that's something that has to be in the conversation.
All right, let's back up for a minute. The good news for Sampson County is our location was strategically positioned between Wilmington and the Raleigh Triad. Therefore, we've got interstate highways that are available to us, so that we're in a very desirable area if we want to plan and direct growth. Growth is going to come. The question is whether we're going to influence it for the benefit of our citizens and the county, or are we going to let it occur naturally? I'm inclined to believe that we need to direct and encourage it and facilitate and foster it as development. So from that standpoint, I hope that we're in a position to start putting the deposits back in all of the reserve accounts next year. But let's just cut right to the chase. Our tax rate is 82.5 cents. I cannot argue with anybody that it is not a high rate compared to some of the other surrounding counties. But counties basically have 2 ways that they can increase revenue. You can either increase your tax base, or you can increase your tax rate. And so those are basically the only 2 choices that we've had. At the same time, we've had some very good growth in the last 2 or 3 years with sales tax receipts, because a lot of people are shopping from home. I'm concerned that the proportion of my budget that comes in sales tax may not increase as much in the future as it has over the last 2 or 3 years. So it would behoove us, if we want to keep the same level of county services, to ensure that we're investing and still promoting those areas where we can get the existing industry. And from the research that our economic development people do, and they participate in the Southeast Partnership, it is hard for counties to attract businesses and industry unless you've got shovel-ready projects, and maybe in some cases an inventory of businesses for which to sell them. So that emphasis is still important. So if we're looking at our circumstances now where our budgetary constraints are limited, you can then say, well, maybe we need to hold. You can have 1 or 2 views, and you can make the argument either way. You can make the argument we need to forestall some of those investments because of the constraints that we have, or we need to look and say, well, if we're going to really recover the way we want to, maybe this is a signal that maybe we ought to continue our emphasis on economic development. I would tell you, I tend to think, or would like to see us continue with the emphasis on economic development, but depending on your perspective, you can make a good argument either way.
And there's a couple of things I want to touch on, the sales tax thing versus property tax. Oftentimes folks will say, wouldn't it be much easier to sell the idea of a sales tax because it's more equally spread throughout the population rather than a property tax, because a property tax seems to only hit those folks that have either property or own their home or a car or whatever. That you do a sales tax at a smaller rate, that might be important, but there's a lot of layers to that. touch on that.
Well, the biggest thing to understand is generally your argument could be, if you were going with strictly sales tax, then it is having a significant disadvantage to people on the lower income side, as opposed. However, I think it's important that will be a part of any taxing program you have. And then, of course, you've got the property taxes. But bear in mind, the county does not go out and just decide we want to raise sales tax. That is something that we have to go to the General Assembly, and that they literally have to vote and give us authorization on. And I think there is, I think we are maxed out at the sales tax we can have, I think, and I may not be as clear on this, JW. I think we're within about a half cent of what we could do if the General Assembly would allow it. And then again, a lot of times when they're authorizing sales tax, they will also give you the specific purpose for which it may be used. So if we had additional sales tax that go into the general fund for us to expend on regular county expenditures, that would certainly be a positive for us.
But it's all part of a process, and either way, folks are going to pay for it one way or the other, which gets us back to the economic development piece. If you have a large multi-million-dollar industry that comes in that employs 500 or 600 people, that's a huge thrust into the pot, to the bank of the county, but to be utilized as resources.
Yes. For example, when Inviva came to the county, as I recall, that was that added between $100 and $120 million to the tax base. That was a real boon. At the same time, I can tell you, in the year the county owned that property before I came here as county manager, there was a lot of criticism at the time of the county owning that property. However, when Inviva came, I can pretty much attest to the fact if we hadn't owned the property and were able to give them the water that they needed, they probably would not have come here, which sort of begins to help prove the case. Is if you want industry to come, not only do you have to have the sites, but you've got to have all of the other amenities such as water and sewer that they need when they come. And keep in mind, the industry coming is more than just adding to your tax base. It is trying to provide sustainable jobs for your population, so the people that were born here, not everybody will be able to farm. And we value agriculture and its contribution. It is our base layer. But in order to provide for our citizens, we also need to do that next step to provide those alternatives for employment for those people that are not farming, that decide they may want to stay in Sampson County.
And what I hear you saying is that this whole market, this whole discussion we're talking about development is not only highly competitive, but it's kind of everybody needs to be in it. Everybody needs to be part of it. Folks need to discuss that and say, whose role is it? Whose responsibility is it? I mean, we had one commissioner, I recall a while back, that was one of the things he was saying was, everybody's part of this, and we all need to be we need to be somewhere on the playing field.
Yes. Without question, this is a determination that requires everybody's input, or needs everybody's input, to decide what the emphasis is going to be. We have done a good job in having sites near Roseboro, now Newton Grove, that is under option, plus the property we've purchased in the industrial park. So we're trying to be as open and transparent to serve the entire county as possible.
We've got a lot to talk about. We're coming on the last segment. I want to make sure we touch on several key things. And again, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We are coming up on our last segment. There's some issues we're going to talk about. It's affecting your life. And Ed Causey, the county manager, is right at the core of all these discussions. So stay tuned. We'll be back in one moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us today. We Should Know is on there. We're coming up on our last segment. I want to pause for a moment and thank each and every one of you for emailing us, giving us ideas about people you would like to hear from, commentaries about shows we've had, maybe some explanation that we can help with in any capacity. Remember, you can reach us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. If you want to drop us a postcard or send us a letter, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. That's 28328, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Also want to thank all those folks at WCLN Radio. We are simulcast on radio, and the folks that mention our show and kind of help keep you informed. Tommy Elliott, of course, each and every week mentions our show. Robert Stroud with the Boogie Shoe Radio Network on Saturdays. We appreciate what Robert does for the community. Wayne Weeks with the Gospel Hour, and many other folks that are part of this messaging and informing the public issue. Today we're talking with Ed Causey, County Manager. Ed, again, thank you for being with us. I want to kind of try to get into this idea of not only looking at the steps you've taken in your previous role for years with the federal government, involved money for the past decade plus with the Sampson County government, local government. Where are we at when you look at it in a time situation, in a historical situation? Are we at unprecedented times trying to figure out where we're going, or have you seen some of these things before?
I don't think I have seen any of the conditions that the country's facing now before. Okay. But at the same time, I tell you that the positive part of this is I travel around on my own from personal observations. I would tell you that the economy in the country is much more resilient than what you think. Like everybody else, when I go and fill up my car at the gas pumps and spend $75 on a Honda Accord, it gets kind of expensive, and you begin to think. But at the same time, if you travel down to the coast and you look at the economy and what is going on, you get a different perspective. So I'm inclined to think that the challenges we face are short-term. However, our short-term challenges with inflation and some of the decision-making at the federal level has been a little bit disappointing. I also see the end of the rainbow, where at some point in time, that is going to begin to improve significantly. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to predict actually when it's going to begin to improve significantly. I'm inclined to think we will be seeing the differences by this time next year of certainly the inklings of improvement.
And I think your point is right on there, because a lot of our major economists, and we've talked about a number of those economists often, they'll tell you that they sense that we're approaching an inflation situation, but they can't be factually correct on it. So it's that movement forward. Is that what you're looking at when you're thinking about allocations and allocation of resources and what you may need to have on reserve, those, especially in the critical areas for the county?
Well, certainly in the short term, if you bear in mind what was going on for the previous 2 months, Mr. Clack and I, when we were doing budgeting and evaluating, with the sheriff's vehicles and EMS, we have a lot of vehicles on the road, public works. I suspect that the one thing we're going to find out probably in the next 3 or 4 months is how good our projections were on gas, fuel, and oil, and that in the short term certainly could make us do some adjustments that we might not otherwise had to do. So we'll see how that works out. I do believe that there are positive things. The one thing I would share with you is it goes back to conversations we've had before when we look at budgeting. If we look at the budgeting that the county does, it is no difference than what families do. And what families have to recognize, there is a difference between cash and cash flow. There's a difference between living and what your total assets are. And I often give the example, and maybe even did it here, a family's got $75,000 of household income. That is good and seems to be carrying them in short term, unless they're living in a dwelling that needs $100,000 worth of improvements. And at some point in time, that is going to create a challenge. I would say at the same time with the county, as we move forward, we've got to be mindful of the existing human and physical infrastructure that we've got to maintain. And at the same time, we're trying to decide to grow and accommodate the population. We've got to be prepared to make sure that we're addressing those issues, or as a minimum, understanding where we are relative to those issues at all times. You
mentioned physical infrastructure. That brings to mind critical and key question, and that's back to public schools. We're at the process of, I think, from the last word I heard, bringing together a emergency operations center building. And a lot of folks look at that multi-million-dollar building and go, well, why don't we spend that money on schools, or particularly school, Hopton High School or something? That money was brought together in a whole different capacity and a way of availability. Explain that so folks can understand why it's not. You can't compare the two, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, what we're doing in emergency services and all of the things that they provide affects literally everybody in the county. And I think public safety and health care and getting those services are extremely important. That building is going to cost us plus or minus $18 million. I think the last project budget that I had was about 18.4. The only loan money, only money other than grants, if we've got into that building, is $3.5 million. So basically, at the end of the day, the county will have borrowed $3.5 million and will have gotten an $18 million a building, and that is a credit to the state. That is a credit to Golden Leaf and all of the other funding sources. So the funding opportunity and the need and the need, I think, clearly has been demonstrated.
And plus, those funds wouldn't have been available even if you could have just said, well, let's just build a high school. That, number one, it wouldn't have been available for that. And number two, from what I can understand, a high school, for example, and I keep referring to Hopton because I know it's been part of a discussion for some time, we're talking $50 million plus for a high school. Is that even close?
I'm hearing in the range of $50 to $75 million for a new high school.
Which is huge.
Which is huge.
So the responsibility for something of that nature to flippantly say, well, I think we need to go do that, you just can't do that, not only given the economic situation now, but even if we were in a very level economic situation, it would still be something that would require a lot of thought, because again, as you use the analogy, you be basically talking about replacing the roof on the house and redoing the foundation.
Number one, we don't have the reserves to build a new school, and so the only way that it could be done, if the decision is made to, unless we're getting grant money from somewhere, the only other way to do it is for the county to use COPS funding or some similar funding and pay it, and then your repayment, of course, is what is added to your tax rate, depending on what your cost will be. And that would, I can tell you in advance, that would be fairly significant without doing any calculations.
And you and I have talked about this before too, is a bond referendum for something of that nature. A bond referendum would be required for the entire county, not just one district, correct?
Yes, if you were going to sell bonds general obligation bonds, then a countywide referendum would be required.
I think we have a playing field here, and a lot of folks, and I think you and I both would agree that would be great. Is the need there? Absolutely. But how do we get to that vehicle that will take us to accomplishing that? Is that something you see that could happen within the next year, next 3 years, next 5 years, the next decade? Are we on a path that we could get there?
Well, at the end of the day, I do not foresee available state and federal grant monies as much in the future as what we've had in the past. So I can't predict at this point in time what the grant money. If the county is going to make the commitment to borrow the money and build a new school, then it's going to have to be prepared to come up with the repayment for whatever is required. If we're at 82 cents now, I'm not sure there is the will today from a debt payment standpoint to encumber a lot of additional debt. Here again, from an administrative standpoint, once the Board of Commissioners have made a decision on what they want to do, administration will work very diligently to come up with the best means possible to get it done.
Well, and I think it's a good point. I mean, and again, I would say, just an observation here, we're talking about time. So when you look back at Midway High School and Union High and some of these other schools that were built prior to the need for Hopton, it was a different time and different situation when that money was borrowed, correct? And are we still paying
yes
on that money? And folks, I guess, have to understand,
right,
we've got those vehicles out there we're still paying for.
Yes.
Is that a concern for you as it relates to tax rates and other things, paying that money back?
Without question, it is a concern. At the end of the day, our job is to help the county or help the commissioners come up and make the best decisions possible as they try to strategically determine what they're going to do. We're not, as an administrative staff, we're not opposed to anything. We just want everyone to understand the consequences of whatever it is we choose to do. If the county decides they want a new school or anything else, we're committed to help do that. We just can't guarantee you that it will not affect the tax rate.
I know we get a lot of questions. We're coming up on about 30 seconds here before we go to close. I want to give you about 10 seconds. Any last thing you want to say before we close today?
The good news about what is going on, this is an opportunity for us to be very, very strategic and very innovative and very creative as we plan the financing of the county for the next year to ensure that we maintain as sustainable position as possible.
I want to thank you for being with us, and look forward to having you back. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of things we could have dug deeper, but then we would have done a semester and you could have been a professor and we could just give folks a certificate or something. So think about that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again next week. We encourage you to go to the website and look at the county budget, 890 pages. Don't miss it. Take a look at it. And again, next week, we look forward to seeing you. And always remember, we should know, and you're part of this show each week, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.